Hello, and you're very welcome to Transform, the Digital Government Podcast. I'm Maeve Neefsey. This episode is part 2 of a fascinating interview with Joe Nugent, the true transformer in Ireland's digital government. In our first interview, Joe claims his extraordinary career was just about being in the right place, at the right time, with the right person. Well, we all know that's not the total truth. In this episode, Joe talks about getting buy-in if you're really going to make things happen. And he believes that AI is just about to possibly transform our health system. So in the last podcast, we talked about some of the projects that you were involved in. And when I say projects, that's probably a really bad thing to say because they're much more than that. They're transformations, really, they are. And we've left off with, we talked about the citizen's information and we also talked about the passports. But that life didn't end there, sure didn't.
No, I mean, I've moved on through local government where I was involved in the project to capture the charge for the non-principal private residence piece and also encourage a greater level of sharing of technology and services across the local authority sector. And then I retired from the civil service after almost 7 wonderful years in An Garda Síochána, where technology is now playing such an extraordinary place of difference for those working there, and certainly has the opportunity to save lives, genuinely save lives.
Talk to us about this. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I'm sure that's the case. I can imagine it. But tell us what specifically you're talking about.
When I look at, I suppose, at a couple of things, the volume of data that was available to An Garda Síochána, but without the systems to enable an analysis of that, and what we can see today is a far greater approach to being certain about how to deliver on Garda services, if you can call a Garda checkpoint a service, but understanding where checkpoints should be located and the time should be located sounds simple today, but the vast volume of material that have been there in Garda Síochána without having the intelligent infrastructure to interrogate that and to provide the sort of information, I think is was a challenge. And I know, in talking to my colleagues in Garda HQ and around the country, their ability to put in place operations to target checkpoints around times where there were a greater level of expectation that individuals up to no good might be travelling the roads, having a device that will enable them to check and see what cars they might, what they might be able to do with cars through ANPR, number plate recognition, or indeed other tools that would enable them to have a better sense of what's there. It's might be surprised to the public to know that up until relatively recently, a Garda who stopped you on the side of the road really had very little information about you when they got to speak to you. Now they can use their mobile phone and can get information to confirm that you are there. If the car is stolen, probably won't be aware of that up to now, whereas now they would be aware of it. If the car is uninsured, they can again have a almost instantaneous perspective on that as a change. To move into a domain where they can interrogate massive volumes of CCTV that's captured around a murder, and to try and zone in and find those connections using facial recognition technology in a passive way. And by that I mean not going out there, but actually saying, can I find any other instances of this white van or of this individual around that space? One of my first visits to a Garda station was to a murder investigation going on in Cork, going back to 7 years ago, and I was watching this team of Gardaí who were spending their time just sifting through hour after hour after hour manually of CCTV, and that what's work is going on through Andrew O'Sullivan and his team in Garda HQ is different. Now we should be able to in the years to come move to a space where we can improve that. If a vulnerable child is identified in a graphical video, that the Garda can respond very quickly to try and see can we find that child and respond more immediately to the problems that are there. Now, clearly, it has to be done in a fashion that continues to hold the trust of the public. And in, Commissioner Harris and the team that are there's a very strong emphasis of that. This is not about Big Brother. This is about trying to empower the Gardaí to assist the public and, as they get into difficulty.
You talk about empowerment. I remember when we were having a conversation, just to let our listeners know, you're one of the judges on the R&D Government Awards. And so we've talked about lots of projects. But I know, you came up with some really novel ways of engaging with your colleagues in the Garda Síochána to get them involved in some of the transformation. I remember you telling me about a situation where they created a video for you. Maybe you want to just tell us that story.
Yeah, so when we started, I asked the technology team to say, let's create just a video about what's possible. Let's not worry about the technology. Let's not worry about what's available today. But if we were to think blue sky, what that might look like.
And why video? You were saying, okay, let's not worry about operations. Let's not worry about budgets. Let's just come up with ideas. But you wanted them to create a video of what their thoughts were, was it? Yeah.
So actual scenes of engagement. So what might the technology actually do? I didn't want them to reinvent, to invent something brand new, but I said, just assume that certain things can be done. So that number plate check, that check of using the mobile phone came as a result of that talk. And the power of the video was that those who weren't directly involved could understand what was being delivered. And very quickly, people wanted to get involved and said, actually, can we turn this concept video into a reality? And that's the case today. As I was driving home the other evening, was stopped at a routine checkpoint. I wasn't drinking or anything like that. but I did notice that the Garda members were able to use their mobile phone to get basic information around the car and satisfy themselves. Yeah, the car is taxed and insured, is not stolen. The individual who is associated with the car is not somebody of interest to us. And allowed me to pass through very quickly. But behind that, there may well have been somebody who wasn't, who was up to no good, who was stopped and stopped immediately.
Yeah.
So,
also the idea that you involved your colleagues who came up with the concept themselves, I presume that, is an element of ownership then, rather than resistance, if you know what I mean, that worked very effectively.
Yeah, agree completely, Maeve.
Yeah.
We suddenly saw, as opposed to a project that was being led by technologists, what you were actually getting were Gardaí who were operating on the front line, who were saying, okay, yeah, how can I help? What can I do here? How can this assist me in my day-to-day work? And there are certainly divisions around the country who jumped at this, who wanted to get involved, who got Gardaí directly involved and who are out using it very heavily and very aggressively and breaking it where, where breaks were needed so that it could be fixed and repaired. And ultimately, that sense of empowerment, that sense of their involvement, the sense that it wasn't being imposed on them was ultimately hugely successful. And I think, as I look forward with confidence, that approach will continue in Garda Síochána. I'm sure more other services will be delivered in time.
And tell me just about, vendor selection, horrible expression, but you're picking people to partner with you for a long time on these projects. Any kind of advice on the importance of it and any examples you can say where it's been a game changer, really?
Certainly, when I look back to passports again, the passport design, there's a relatively small company out in Bray who produced the booklet. They won the procurement for that book on the back of their approach and their understanding. They invested a huge amount of time in getting the design that is there today. And in that sense, they did so in a fashion that other vendors didn't get. And I think with other vendors, it would have been a question of saying, well, we promised we would provide you with 10 hours. That's 10 hours up now, end of story. Whereas, to be fair to the vendor that was selected, they understood what was being sought. They understood that what was there was about what did the public want, what could be achieved. And that level of personal involvement, became hugely important. And whereas most of those individuals have now moved on to other things, I retain that sense of friendship with most of them, because they were as bought into the what was being sought as ourselves. And for me, that's one of the piece of advice is you need to be confident in the vendor select that they would understand where you're coming from.
So there's a kind of a cultural, psychological match, not just the technology.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think back to my time in foreign affairs, an archaic infrastructure that was in place at a time when there was no clear sense in the marketplace about where technology was going in that area. And the vendor that was working with ICT and Foreign Affairs with me was able to argue both cases, but bought into the concept of saying, well, how do we deliver something that's not going to lock us into a technology set, that was going to provide services, multiple services that we hadn't even envisaged at the time. And that, again, that personal buy-in by the individuals who are involved in that process was hugely important. And again, I don't think that the infrastructure that's in place for Foreign Affairs would have been to the confident level we're at today, but for that vendor engagement.
And just in terms of, red flags, your experience, it's 30 years. You must have red flags. You go, I just have a few, I know this isn't going to work. That you could give to somebody else, just to say, to double check.
I certainly remember in that Foreign Affairs stage, there was a very strong push internally to go in a particular direction. And it just didn't ring true with me. Not that the technology choice was wrong, but I just felt that the emotions were leading the strong sense. And by engaging with people and trying to strip away from that emotional approach to a logical and a very objective approach was critically important. And I think that became very clear as the way to go on. In the appointment system that's in place, it would have been very simple just to deliver a click, check here for a particular slot. Here are the slots available, take it or leave it. But again, that sense from internally, which was very much to move in that direction, was checked by others, myself included, to say, well, hang on, maybe we should be trying to tailor this to meet the needs, the greatest need. And so being aware, I suppose, of those sorts of challenges were big there, were big issues. And the resolution of that is, as I mentioned earlier, talking to other colleagues, talking to others who've gone down roads, talking to others and sense checking with others, so people who you can trust, who might know your own direct business, who might just identify something become hugely important. And there are plenty of individuals out there, to this day in the civil service. OGCIO and Barry Larry and his team are well placed to understand what individuals are trying to achieve and are a very good sounding board as well as anything else. And I think I would certainly encourage people to sense check what they're looking to do with others before they get caught.
Oh, well, the great news is they can come to the summit on the 19th of September. They can network and mix with their peers. Anyway, unashamed push there for the event. But those things are really important.
No, they're really, really important. And people, there aren't enough opportunities for individuals to engage with their peers. Oh. People are busy. They're caught in their own immediate pressures. But having that space where you can step out and hear of the experience of others becomes hugely important. And as you said, the summit is a hugely important and empowering space for individuals to go out and step out of the day job and to look, a little bit higher at what's happening across the public service.
And, it's great when you can pick up the phone or you can email somebody and you're not in competition with the other, unlike the private sector, right? So in theory, everybody should be helping everybody else, but we have to facilitate the moments, right?
We do, and providing those opportunities is hugely important, and the summit has delivered on that. 21 years, did you say?
21 years, yes. We can't believe it.
And I think that on the back of that, there's huge, there are many, many positive stories that have come through that, and having seen so many of the extraordinary projects, they have been transformational, and they have made a difference for the general public. And that, for me, it comes back to that. What is it that we're trying to achieve? We're not trying to feather our own nest. This is about how do we make the life of the general public that much easier.
And also, obviously, the back end people trying to do their jobs, right? And they want efficiency as much as the people at the front end, right?
Well, you asked about the individuals in Moses Street and in Cork and in London who are dealing directly with passport customers. I'm absolutely certain that their experience today is a much more positive experience than it would have been 15 years ago.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, I remember when we were first involved in digital transformation and e-government, as we called it. We're going to stick with that name, even though people think it's old-fashioned. But we found that Ireland was doing extremely well, weren't we? We were trailblazers. Where are we now, do you think, if we're being objective? Where are we? Who are the leaders and where are we on the scale?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure who. I mean, some of the sort of Far Eastern countries have moved and have always been those leaders. So
Singapore was always good, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Some of those countries have. Maybe we have run into. We've dealt with the low hanging fruit, and we're now at those big challenges. I mentioned identity. Like in some of those countries, identity is just given up, So in Singapore,
imposed.
It's imposed.
Yeah.
To do things, you have to register. And I don't know if that's necessarily useful from an Irish perspective. I think though, as I said, for us to progress, we need to be more open to change. We need to look at technologies and see what we might be able to achieve. So, for example, might AI deliver improvements in our health sector? Perhaps they will, in terms of the pressures that are on our professional clinicians. Can we give them tools that would at least help them in making better decisions?
Yeah, exactly.
And there are opportunities there, and it's about technologists assisting with business transformation individuals, and ultimately those directly involved in the front end to make the service better.
And what about the future? What's coming down the track? What do you think is going to be the next big moment?
I think, as I said, and I know I'm going around in circles, I do think we will have to have that conversation about identity, and I think that will change things. I think there's a level of debate around facial recognition technologies and where they might be used, and perhaps they have been led in a particular fashion, but I do think they have the ability to assist enormously. And I think that we need to step back and see what are we trying to achieve here. And I do think that ultimately those customer service experiences can be improved. When I started in this journey, there were local authorities around the country who very much thought about centralising everything, about having a single point of contact for all service delivery physically. And I'm not sure that's necessary anymore. I think we should be able to allow the technology almost to prompt you to say, you're applying for this particular service. Did you realise that there are other services that might be available to you, crossing those boundaries of administrative responsibility?
Which is I remember trying to work on projects where we were trying to preempt people, whereas now AI can figure out what you want to ask next without you having to actually do all that thinking a lot of the time. Is that true?
No, it's very true.
Yeah.
And I certainly saw some work that was being done in Garda HQ around using some innovative search technologies to pull material together to start showing linkages that perhaps might not otherwise be seen. And I think that
take a long time to be seen.
Or take a long time to be seen. Yeah, very true. And I think that ultimately is a way forward for a lot of things. And I think sharing that knowledge and experience that's built up in the Guards across other sectors and across other agencies, I think will lead to a better good for everyone. And
do you worry about cybersecurity? Are you concerned? Do you think we might pull back on some of the progress because of it?
On day 3 An Garda Síochána, we had a ransomware attack on one PC, and it was isolated very quickly. But when I look at what happened in the HSE and saw the damage, that's there to this day as they try and prepare for that. Court case is still out there around leaking of material. It's difficult. It's very difficult for a country of our size, for agencies of their size to compete against international actors and rogue actors in that sense. And I think that is something that's there. And again, to come back to, we talked about the summit, that opportunity for individuals to engage and to share experience becomes even more important, because no matter what you do, no matter where you are, it is very difficult to see how you can compete against those rogue actors on your own. You definitely need the assistance of others.
And has the EU helped? Are they trying to kind of bring together the knowledge and try and act as one body, do you think?
Certainly, as I said, I speak from the justice sector, where I saw engagement directly, particularly across police forces, not in sharing data, but in sharing approaches to technology and sharing approaches to ways forward. And I think that's got to be welcomed and recognised as a positive. The EU is big enough to assist, and I think that's where we need it. And I think, the attacks that there were on the HSE here, on water service providers in the UK and other big utility companies that we've seen across Europe have just brought home that no matter how big people feel they are, they're really small in the overall scheme. And ultimately, people are better standing together.
Exactly. And what about medicine? And what do you think is going to be happening in the future? Or have you imagined what it might look like?
I certainly, I speak from the experience of engaging with the health service with my dad and the challenges that they had about pulling material together, because so much of it was in a paper fashion. And I know we've, as a society, we moved on beyond that, but nonetheless, the ability to assess and understand complex cases can only be assisted by our technology approach. AI has a huge value in that, in seeing those non-obvious linkages and providing and prompting the clinicians with an understanding of what's there. And that's ultimately can only have positive effects. Not saying that we should be driven entirely by the AI technology, but giving more information to the clinician has to be good.
I mean, absolutely. And faster, because we have such issues with people waiting and waiting to be diagnosed or assessed or screened. Yeah. And do you get excited about things in the future? Do you ever think you wish we were in the middle of it again? Maybe you're still in the middle of it in different ways.
No, I guess, we change all the time. So the world that I joined the civil service is a world of technologies that are no longer existing. WordPerfect, Lotus 123, Microsoft Mail, technologies that had just, exactly. They're just complete, not even a Windows terminal. So we've accelerated through extraordinary change in those 30 years. You have to be excited about where we might be in 30 years to come. Will we see changes in quantum computing or whatever else that might come along? But that pace of change is extraordinary, and one can only assume that we have a similar pace of change in the years ahead. And ultimately, as I said at the very start, if we can put the customer at the centre of what's been done, then it's all good.
Yeah, exactly. And just in terms of the Big Five, everybody seems to feel the Big Five get all the projects. What's your experience?
Well, maybe I was at a bad reputation. Not many of the Big Fives did business with me. Not necessarily that they were bad or anything like that, but I think you have to be open to look at the resources that the Big Five can bring, and there's no doubt that they have a lot of strength there and a lot of knowledge there. But also be open to some of those more niche companies who have a different perspective, who are looking at things in a slightly different way, and recognise that in their space that they can bring value as well. And maybe what we need to be thinking about are the combination of some of the big players and some of the smaller players, and ultimately. We as a country have developed huge numbers, and this better than me, huge numbers of really strong, powerful indigenous technology companies. And it would be terrible if they were being ignored just because we were unsure.
And you mentioned the company in Bray. Are they still up? Could we mention them, give them a bit of a boost?
Smurfit Kappa and Bray are the people who designed the current passport. There's a procurement underway, so I don't want to say too much.
Okay, fair enough.
But at the same time, they've done an extraordinary positive job. They have seen what the Irish passport might look like. They brought innovation to some of the technology that was used around the card, and ultimately this came from a small company based out in a relatively small space, and they are just reflective of what can happen in so many other companies around the country.
Yeah, and we've got so much good technology on our doorstep. Yeah. Well, look, that was just fascinating, and I want to let everybody know that you're going to be, aren't you, at our summit? We hope you will be at the awards, so that people will get to network you and ask you more questions, because you haven't disappeared.
No, I haven't disappeared. I'm very happy to take, if anyone wants to make contact with me, more than happy to give an insight into perhaps my experience. As I said, there are others who are leading this transformation going into the future. And if there's something that I can do to help those, then I'd be more than happy to do that. Okay,
you heard it here, folks. It's from the fantastic Joe Nugent. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast, Transformer. You are a transformer, and hopefully you will be listening, but we also might have you back, because there might be more stories that you can have a voice in. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Maeve, and the best of luck with this fantastic podcast.
Oh, thank you. And I want to thank again everybody here. So thank you to Conala Moran, our producer, our station manager, Peter Bryce, sound Lee Brennan, and videographer Juliana Verkovic. I hope I'm going to get that right. And of course, thank you to South Dublin Podcast Studio.